Right, well, welcome again, students. So I'm here on Sunday night. I was just listening to Boris say that we might be tucked away for a little while longer. So I thought what we do is if this video's proved to be a bit more successful, I think a bit more helpful, then I'll just carry on through with this method of doing things. And I'll always set you a paragraph or a couple of paragraphs to write. And if it's something that you don't enjoy, send me a message. If you think it's okay, great. If you've got a question, ask a question of me, then ask a question via the email on the Google Classroom if you can. Okay, so just in this short little teaching session, what we're going to look at is the power of Earl Godwine and how that was established, obviously, in the reign of Canute itself. So we're still talking about King Canute from the mind map. So this is sort of the second point, and then we went backwards. So I kind of dealt with the third one, being an Anglophile as a king. This is about the establishment of the power of Earl Godwine, and then we'll talk about Emma of Normandy in the next lesson. Okay, so if you can do it as a little spider diagram like we did last time, you might find that useful. So first thing to say, the power of Earl Godwine that is established in the reign of King Canute is such an important part of the course. It's simply because lots of the questions you'll get asked in essays eventually, they'll never focus specifically on the reign of Canute, but it's the reign of Canute that sees some really important long-term developments, things happening in the course that can always be written about in essays about, say, for example, Edward the Confessor or the year 1066. Okay, so at the centre of the mind map, two things to say first of all. So when we look at the power of Earl Godwine, what we say first of all is that his rise to power, first of all, in the reign of Canute, was a rapid rise to power. It's the first thing to say. The second thing to say is what this actually did, it was also then the foundation, not just of the power then of Earl Godwine, but it was the foundation for the power of the Godwine family. So again, whenever we're writing about the power of the Godwine family, we always try and look back to this foundation period where Earl Godwine managed to place himself in a very envious position of some power. Okay, so if you have a little look, just give you a little bit of time to fill those in, then all we do is we look at four places where we can gain evidence to see how that rapid rise to power happened and where the foundation for the power of the Godwine family actually came from. Okay, so we've got land, marriage, preeminence, and we've got a quotation here, and we'll attribute that in a moment, where one historian actually talks about Godwine becoming a virtual co-ruler of England. Matter of debate, but worth debating. Okay, so let's put some notes in then about land. So when Canute became king in 1016, we know that there was a period of time where he did favour some of the Anglo-Saxon nobility and he raised them to prominence. Now, Earl Godwine was foremost amongst those men. So in 1018, only 2 years after Canute comes to power, we see Godwine appear for the first time as an earl, suggesting that that title was given to him by Canute, and he becomes Earl of what we think at the time was actually Eastern Wessex. Now, in the GCSE course, if you studied the Norman Conquest, we'd always talk about Wessex as one earldom when we talk about it in A-level history. And we must understand that during the reign of Canute, it appeared to have been split into two areas. So in 1018, Godwine was made Earl of Eastern Wessex. That rapid rise, though, is really shown very clearly by the fact that within only 2 years of that time, we start to see him appearing as owning all of Wessex. And Wessex is very significant also. It is the richest earldom, so it put quite simply, makes the most money through taxation. And it also contains as well the ancient capital of England, which is Winchester. Now, students reasonably ask me a question at that point, and they say, well, is Winchester at this time as significant as London? London was growing as a centre for trade and commerce, but Winchester still contains what we call the Chancery, which is where writs and charters are actually produced, if you remember. And it also contains as well the Treasury. So it's where all the money, the silver pennies, are stored away from the kings raising taxation. So it's a significant place to be in. Okay, so marriage. Probably in the same year that he actually inherited all of Wessex, 1020 again, we have a significant political marriage. And this is where Earl Godwine married the sister of, the sister-in-law of Canute. Okay, we don't need to know her name specifically, but it's important because we know that when a marriage is offered, then it's very, very clear that there is a growing trust between Canute and Godwine. Use a tier 2 word here, and we can use it for a lot of the course then where we see these things being established. So what we have here is we have a family, and here's the tier 2 word. I need to focus on these as much as on this course as we do on the Rufus course. A family nexus was established. Okay. Now, that word quite simply means a connection. Okay, so a family nexus was established. Now, it may be helpful within our analysis then of the rise of the power of Earl Godwine to actually try and establish at what point he becomes preeminent. And preeminent would mean that he is first, foremost in terms of the noble that Canute trusts in England. So how far was Earl Godwine the preeminent, or how far had he risen to preeminence in England, and what year did that occur? Now, we're never quite sure about the dates of this, so we'll put it in with a question mark, but then we'll attribute a particular date within the period. Okay, so 1019 to 1023, just with a question mark. We know in this period that Canute actually went back to try and secure control of Denmark, and he actually took Earl Godwine with him, which in itself is interesting. It shows a degree of trust, a bond between these two men, so far enough that he would have expected Earl Godwine's loyalty when he went back to Denmark. Now, we're not quite sure of the dates of that, so that's why we've got a range of dates. But we can be sure that in 1021, what had happened is that Canute had been relying on a man called, a lovely name, Thorkel the Tall, and he was obviously of Danish origin, and he'd been relying on Thorkel the Tall to advise and give him help when he was actually still running England. Now in 1021, Thorkel the Tall had actually been exiled back to Denmark. So what we do is perhaps we start to see a date emerging of 1021 when Godwine is trusted enough to go back with Canute to Denmark, when Thorkel the Tall, if you like, the last person that Canute had relied upon. So 1021 is possibly a date that we can start to state that Godwine has preeminence in terms of being the person that Canute trusts above anyone else. Okay, students, and finally, in the course, all I do is that we don't have to use the views of historians within our written work, but it can be a nice way to develop some analysis within your essay work. So all I ask students to do is that I would only ever give you quotations from two historians and from one of their books each. So basically two historians, two books for you to remember. That way I've found in the past that students are capable of employing the views of a historian just to raise some analysis within their written work. So one historian, we mentioned him last time, so hopefully we'll get to know him quite well. This is a man, as I said before, who's called Simon Schama. And Simon Schama starts to argue in his book, A History of Britain, that it's possible that we could see Earl Godwine as a virtual co-ruler of England in the reign of Canute. Now, that could be a point of some exaggeration, but again, what we can do is we can add in some more evidence to prove why that might not be so far from the truth. So in 1023, what we see is some very precise and clear evidence that Godwin's power was growing. And this is because he became the first witness, the first name on any charter that Canute issued. So his name appears after the name of Canute when he's signing a charter, trying to establish the will of the king across all of England. So he's the first earl, he's the first witness, which again can help us to argue, if you prefer that word, that he had come to preeminence by 1023. You may argue that 1021 is another reasonable date to use in your analysis. Okay, so as we did last time, sorry, I just knocked my iPad there. So I need to give you a question and I'll just help you through that. And again, just one paragraph here, please, if we can. Okay, so to what extent did, and we refer to him there just with his name, Godwine, because he wasn't an earl until Canute appeared on the scene. So to what extent did Godwine rise to, you want to use that word we've been trying to use, okay, rise to preeminence in the reign of Canute. So just to read that again, to what extent did Godwine rise to preeminence in the reign of Canute? Obviously, we don't want you simply writing round here. And I do want that evidence in there, but we're trying to build some argument into this. So please make sure that you're explaining the evidence in depth. To help you through, you might try and possibly argue the case for some of the significant dates that Godwine actually came to preeminence. And it's also significant that if we actually place within this the dates of Canute's reign, there is a great significance to argue that from the time that he became king in 1016, we are only talking about 7 years of his reign, to the extent that he becomes the first witness on the charters of the king. So that would take us back to this word here. It was very much a rapid rise to power. Focus on the question, focus on the word preeminence. And again, on Google Classrooms, I'll actually mention when I'd like this paragraph sent to me as well. That's the way we're going to work things for a little while. If you've got any other suggestions that you can give me about what could help you further, please do let me know.